everyone, and welcome to the Balconia Garden podcast. This is where we talk about all things container gardening, both indoor and outdoor, and you'll find tips and tricks for growing a flourishing container garden, regardless of its size, shape, or the space that you have. And you can also find video tutorials on my YouTube channel. It's called Balconia Garden, and you can listen to this episode on the YouTube channel and also on Spotify. The Spotify account is called Balconia Garden Podcast. Welcome to episode 5. We're in the middle of February now, and spring is on its way. I can feel it. The days are getting longer. The birds are getting very active and loud at work especially. And I am ready. I can't do winter anymore. It was so cold this week in Cologne. It was -degrees at night, and I think the maximum was something like 4 or 5 degrees during the day. I'm done. I can't do it anymore. So as spring is on its way, that means we've got more jobs to do in the garden, in our container gardens, both indoor and outdoor. So today's episode is all about outdoor gardening jobs that can be done in February. My plan was actually to do a February garden job episode completely and do both indoor and outdoor jobs in the one episode, but I think it's going to be over 20 minutes long and that's too long for me. So I'm going to split it into two. So this is part 1. We're going to be looking at outdoor jobs we can be doing in February. And then in a few days, I'll be posting indoor jobs for our container gardens indoors and also for our houseplants. Before we get started, I just want to recommend listening to the January jobs episode, because there are some jobs in that one I posted last month, and the jobs in that one are also relevant for February, so you could still be doing them in February if you haven't already done them. But also the jobs in that episode are actually things that are going to kind of set you up for the whole growing season. So if you haven't listened to that, I would recommend it. I'll post it somewhere or link it in the description. Let's get started. So the first job is to sow seeds indoors. So it is generally still too cold to sow directly outside, but you can start sowing indoors. So you can sow things like peas, broad beans, leeks, kale. If you have a heated propagator and a grow lamp, you can start to sow tender plants like chilies, aubergines, basil, even tomatoes, and flowers like sweet peas and cosmos. So yeah, there are lots of seeds that you can be sowing now. Make sure you're sowing your seeds into appropriate pots for their growth. So for example, peas like to be planted at about 5 centimetres deep in the soil, so they're obviously going to need some space underneath that for the roots to go down. So you can plant peas in a pot around 9 centimetres deep. I find that most pots, ranging between 5 and 9 centimetres have normally done the trick. And of course you can also plant into seed trays. So as ever, check on the seed packets, see what the best thing for that seed is. And when you're sowing, try to use something like a peat-free seed compost. That can be quite expensive. I do know that gardeners, and I've actually done this myself, will just take a good quality peat-free multipurpose compost and mix in some sand and use that for seed compost. But ideally use a seed compost, because our germinating seeds and seedlings have different requirements to obviously when the plant is a bit older. So yeah, you can also do a bit of experimenting, see what works, what doesn't work, and then write it down in that journal. I hope you've all got a journal yet. Write your notes, observe everything you're doing, and so you can see if seed compost actually works or if you can get away with multipurpose compost, and you can know it for next year. The next job is to fertilise the soil. So February is the ideal time to start adding organic matter or compost to our pots or our larger containers. Fertilising provides necessary nutrients for our plants so that they can grow well throughout the whole season, stay nice and healthy, and are more resistant to pests and diseases. The ideal compost ratio varies depending on what plant you're growing. So something like a vegetable, obviously they're going to be, a vegetable compared to a flower, for example, they're going to consume and need more nutrients. So if you're growing vegetables, the ratio is something like 30% compost to soil. For herbs, you can use 20% compost, and for flowers, something like 10 to 20%. Just for simplicity, what I tended to do on the balcony was take the large container and mix between 15 to 20% compost with the soil that I already had. I was growing a variety of herbs and other plants. I found that it always worked for me, so I would mix it all in the larger container and then just put it into the smaller pots as I needed it. When it comes to fertilising something like rose or some bushes, I would actually recommend doing a little bit of research before you fertilise them, because something like a rose, they do have quite specific requirements about when to be fertilised and with what, depending on whatever variety you're growing. And the same can be said for some shrubs. But all in all, February is the perfect time to get fertilising. The next job is to prune our shrubs and trees. If you have any ornamental trees in pots, this is the ideal time to prune many species of shrubs and trees just before the new growth emerges. When we're pruning, look out for what's called the 4Ds. So basically anything that is dead, diseased, damaged, or dysfunctional. I just feel like these plants must feel so attacked when somebody is looking at them and looking for the 4Ds. Anyway, so basically when we're pruning any branches or any dead foliage or whatever, look for anything that's dead, anything with disease on it, anything that's damaged if it's broken off in the wind or something, or it's hanging off, and anything dysfunctional. So something like if the branches are rubbing, or maybe you're growing an ornamental shrub and you want to kind of open up the crown. If you're growing something like a witch hazel or a dogwood, you want that gorgeous form. So obviously, depending on what shrub or tree you're growing, this will depend on how much you cut away. And it's also important to remember, if you have flowering shrubs, there are two types. So there are shrubs that produce flower buds on last season's growth, and there are shrubs that produce flowers on this season's growth. So make sure, if you're pruning now, any of your shrubs in pots, make sure they don't already have flower buds on them, because if you're going to be pruning them back, you're going to miss the beautiful flower display. So something like a forsythia, if you have a forsythia, they will be flowering soon. So again, do a little bit of research before you get snipping. And when you do snip, cut at about a 45-degree angle. This is going to allow any rainwater to just slide off the cut. It's not going to go in, which could lead to rotting. And also use clean, sharp, sterilised secateurs. Ideally, if you're moving between plants, sterilise them in between. I can't say that I've always done that, because sometimes I'm a bit lazy, but it's good practice. It means if there is any disease or virus or whatever in one plant, that you're not then transferring it to the next one. So yes, get snipping. The next job is a little bit more fun, and it's to plant spring containers. So if you're in the supermarkets or in any garden centres right now, you're going to see that they are full of spring flowers and spring flowering bulbs. They're now available to buy. So you can buy a nice mixture of like something like a primrose, light primroses. I love primroses. The yellow ones, or the kind of light buttercup yellow ones, they have the most delicious scent. It's like this delicate, I don't know how, anyway, I've gone off on a tangent, but it's beautiful. Love the scent of primroses. And you can mix in something like violas and spring flowering bulbs like hyacinths. Violas are actually edible as well. So what I like to do is have an edible, just plant a hanging basket full of violas, and then you can just sort of eat them as you go. And you can have your spring containers either indoors or outdoors, and you can also have them in nice hanging baskets, just to sort of brighten up the space and add some colour. And the last job is to keep an eye on our spring flowering bulbs. So if you have potted up any spring flowering bulbs, they should be emerging by now. So make sure that they're not sitting in any water. Give them a water if the soil seems to be a bit dry. If temperatures are fluctuating or it's getting really cold, you can wrap them in bubble wrap or horticultural fleece. This is going to protect the pots, actually. Stop them from exploding if they're expanding and contracting from the freezing. And if it gets really cold, you could just bring them inside for a few days. So that was your February outdoor container gardening jobs. There's some ideas for you to be getting going with. Hope you enjoyed it. Part 2, which will be the indoor February jobs, will be coming, as I said, in a few days. Have I missed any jobs out? Are there any jobs that you are doing? Would love to hear about it. I hope you're all staying safe and well, and I send you, as ever, all my good wishes to your plants as well. And I will connect with you in the next podcast. Goodbye.